So this starts out with an unfortunate incident that I don't really like to admit. When I was in 7th grade, I had my first and only hookup. Nothing major happened, but it was enough to make me realize that I didn't want to be involved in that kind of thing and was a pretty huge prude from that point on. The guy this involved, his friend, my friend, and I had all grown up in the same neighborhood, but I had to move to a different neighborhood a few years before and didn't know the guys as well as he did. I am hanging out with my friend Kate at her house, and she says, "Hey, let's hang out with Caleb and Luke." I agree, and we go to Luke's house, where Caleb was also hanging out. We get there, nothing weird at first, and Katie says, "Hey, so Caleb thinks you're really cute." This is a point in my life where I was very desperate for the approval of others. I was not popular and not many guys had ever been interested in me, so I was very excited about this. Caleb was on the varsity football team, which I was a cheerleader for, and he was also admittedly attractive. I couldn't believe he was interested in me, and it clouded my already 13-year-old level judgment. We all go upstairs, and this is where things got weird. The guys literally started putting on porn and watching it in front of us, like literal DVDs. I was a little weirded out, but again, I had no experience with guys and it didn't bother me as much as it should have. I was desperate to prove to this guy that I was cool, so I said nothing. A few minutes later, someone suggested that we play 7 Minutes in Heaven, and of course, I'd got paired up with Caleb. Kate knew my bad luck with guys, and I think she had good intentions, but this was definitely not the right way to go about things. So we go into the bathroom, and small things happen, by normal people's standards, I guess. Then we come out. I was very naive and knew next to nothing about anything sexual. It was a rude awakening, and I wanted no part of it again. We didn't stay long after that. Nothing ever developed further between Caleb and I was glad. Fast forward to sophomore year of high school, I had completely forgotten about him. I was a totally different person at this point, super goth, career-oriented as a budding opera singer, and very anti-relationship because I saw it was distracting from my goals. That day with Caleb had some very negative, lasting effects on me where sex was concerned, and I had become very afraid of it and ultra-protective of my virginity and my innocence. I was not prepared for what I had encountered that day, and it messed me up to the point where I couldn't even say the word sex out loud until I was married and pregnant with my first child. Anyway, I'm 16 at this point in time, and just chilling in my room. I suddenly get this mysterious text from an unknown number. "Hey sexy." I asked who it was and he says, "I'll give you a hint. We had sex." I informed him that that was impossible because I was a virgin, so he must have the wrong number. He says, "Well, we almost did." I again said that I'd never even almost had sex with anyone. As naive as I was at 13, I would have never let it go that far. So he finally says, "It's Caleb. Don't you remember me? We hooked up." The memories come flooding back. I started to freak out. He says something along the lines of wanting to hook up again, and started saying really gross things that were really triggering. Now, I admit I was on a bit of a high horse about my modesty, because I would not be taken advantage of again, and was proud to have my priorities straight. I lost my temper. I told him, "How dare you think I'd do that stuff with you? Leave me alone." And a few other things I kinda regret. That didn't go well. He lost it and started screaming over text about how stuck up I was. Then he says the kicker, "Whatever. I know where you live. I could come and kill you if I want." I freaked out and immediately called my dad, crying. He came home from work and we called the police. They went and talked to him, but ultimately did nothing. I got lucky in the fact that it scared him off, and I haven't heard from him since. Our school was enormous, so we never saw each other either. But it could have just angered him more, and something truly terrible could have happened. But yeah, to the slimy kid who thought it was okay to ask for a hookup after 3 years of total silence, then threatened my life, let's never meet again. This literally happened an hour ago, and I'm still shaken up about it. Mostly because I don't know why it happened. Around 2 or so, I texted my friend asking her when I could come swing by her place, since we'd planned to spend the night together. She told me to come by 6, so I decided to spend the next few hours doing self-care stuff. I slapped a face mask on, threw on some YouTube, and started to relax for a bit when our intercom starts ringing, meaning someone is asking to be buzzed in. Our apartment building is set up pretty weird, as in it's divided into 2 separate buildings, but only our building is accessible from the main street. Also, the other building's apartments share our building's apartments numbers, with a single letter being the only difference. This means that, more often than not, food shows up at our place that's meant for the lovely couple just across the alley. So when this starts buzzing, I obviously assume it's just food for them, and I don't feel like opening my door once this guy comes all the way upstairs to explain that he needs to go back down and out to the other building while I'm in a face mask and my underwear. So I don't answer the buzzer. It keeps buzzing for about 2 minutes. About 10 minutes later, I'm in the bathroom and washing my face when I hear a bunch of weird noises coming from the fire escape. Our apartment is super small, so literally you could see the bathroom doorway and probably slightly into the bathroom from this window. I walk out from the bathroom, face sopping wet, and see some dude with a backpack on, hunched over with 1 foot on my now open windowsill. It's late November. I live up north. It is way too cold for me to ever have that window open. I am about to shout, "What the F?" when this guy makes eye contact and immediately scrambles back down the fire escape. I am super in shock at this point and can't believe I just saw what I did. And I'm honestly too afraid to immediately run to the window because I don't want him to realize I'm home alone and come back, regardless of his intentions. After I hear the door that leads from the alleyway into the main building slam, I quickly run to both windows in our house that lead to the fire escape and lock them. I'm still very WTF over the whole situation. My boyfriend ran home immediately after because I called him. We both have no idea what the dude could have wanted. Update. We put up a sign downstairs to let everyone know that there was a possible burglar scoping our apartments out, and our downstairs neighbor came upstairs to say she had in fact been robbed. Talking to a 911 operator to report the incident and get the cops sent over, she said, "Oh, he saw you?" I reply, "Yeah." She replies, "Ha, you're lucky, honey." When I started 7th grade, I started hanging out with the meanest kids in the school. All my childhood friends changed when we entered middle school. Cliques began to form, and suddenly the kids I knew since kindergarten didn't want to be my friend anymore. So I took up with the bad kids. There was a whole clan of them, and half of them were family. The ones who were related all lived in what we called a holler, though I now call it the rattlesnake den when or if I drive past it. Holler folk can't be trusted, and if you're from a small rural area, you know what I'm talking about. These kids were ranging in the age from 9th to 12th grade. They were always in trouble, getting suspended, getting detention, defying authority, and they just looked like a bunch of punks. I had always been a good kid, but a lot of things changed in this era for me. My mom married a human-shaped leech around the same time, who was both verbally and emotionally abusive to me. My brother and sister were estranged by that point because of said leech. My mom didn't ever seem to have any time for me and my problems anymore. She was always a single parent up until this point in my life, but honestly not a good one. So taking up with a bunch of angry kids made me feel better, and soon I started doing really bad things too. One of the holler kids in this family was my age, and she and I became best frenemies. So to escape my reality, I tried to spend as much time at her house as I possibly could. I hated it. Those people lived like animals, but it was better than going home. As a side note, there are other terrifying experiences from the same time period, like the time her grandmother held me hostage for 3 days when I was about 13, but I digress. Her older cousins, specifically the ones we call P-Bob, would often bounce around the holler from house to house, probably out of boredom. P-Bob was about 17 or maybe even 18 at the time, and it seemed that once he found out I was spending a lot of time at her house, he came around more and more. I can recall one specific time when I first realized I was afraid of this guy. Frenemy and I were camping in the yard. Our camping trip basically consisted of us setting up an old, worn-out tent off to the side of their Dust Bowl property, taking a radio and some off-brand pop, and staying in the tent until it got too cold at around 3 or 4 a.m. Pretty such that she left me out there by myself that night, but that's neither here nor there. Probably at around 10 or 11 that night, P-Bob and another cousin snuck up on our tent and scared us. P-Bob was a big boy. He was fat, but he also lifted weights. I remember he had a head like a bull, and he always had the most condescending look on his face. Some of the other boys, all of which were older, were actually really nice, and I really considered them my friends. Spoiler, they weren't really my friends, but we'll get there. P-Bob, however, was always aloof. He was never not a smartass, unless he was raging about something. Sometimes when I'd be at my friend's house, I could hear him in his mom's house next door, screaming his guts out at her. He had a little sister who he was unabashedly abusive of. I even once saw him slap her, no holds barred. Full-on hard slap. She was probably 8 or 9, maybe younger. He was also sexually abusive of her, but that's not my story to tell. I remember being afraid to get out of the tent that night while P-Bob was there. Like that old thing was really going to protect me anyway. He was being sexually derogative, if there's such a thing. He was badgering me, but doing it in a way that made it come across as him being comedic. He said something to me about going to another one of the cousins' house and having sex with me on the kitchen counter, though his version of the statement was far more colorful and terrifying. I had no idea how to react, so I caught an attitude with him and started trying to berate him right back, even going so far as to threaten him. I was completely full of crap, but I was an angry child and had no idea how else to handle the situation. To skip ahead, there were dozens of other awful encounters with him over the next year or so. He grabbed me one day at school and tried to throw me down a flight of concrete stairs, all while trying to sneak a feel of various parts of my body. When I said something about it to Frenemy, she belittled me and told me I was being retarded and that he was only being funny. She was a very cruel and hateful person. They all were, really. By 8th grade, these friends had really changed me as a person, and not for the better. Through me, P-Bob was introduced to a girl whom I frequently argued and spatted with named Lorielli. She was a cocky transfer from the hood in Ohio, and she and I hated each other immediately. So we fought often, but never physical. Long story short, she met P-Bob because of one of our arguments, and the two of them started dating. Toward the end of the school year, they broke up. I was oblivious to this, as the only conversations I ever had with this girl were limited to giving her crap and her giving it right back. Until one day, she made a comment about me causing her and P-Bob to break up. I most certainly had nothing to do with that, but I felt she was an imbecile, so I just laughed it off. The end of the school day came and we all loaded on the bus. By this point, I had made a few new friends whom was also friends with the bad holler kids, Tasha, and she was coming to my house for the weekend. We sat down near the back of the bus and waited to leave. I noticed when P-Bob got on the bus, he immediately locked his eyes on me and commenced to giving me the dirtiest look I had ever seen. If looks could kill, right? He sat down in a seat behind me and Tasha. The bus finally took off, and we made it out Route 7 and almost to Doctor's Branch Road, so about 3 or 5 miles, before he really started badgering me. I don't remember everything he said, but for many years I did. In fact, for years following this event, I could hear his words on a loop and experience the attack over and over in my mind. It took a long time to stop thinking about it, so honestly, I'm glad I don't remember it all anymore. But he was saying a lot of horrific stuff. I mean, awful stuff to me. Sick stuff. Threats. I was terrified, but I was more so humiliated. He also said something about me breaking him and Lorielli up, and that I called him a player. I had never heard that word before that day. All my bad kid friends were laughing at me. Tasha was too. This was one of the few times in my life where I truly lost my ability to speak, so I sat there without saying a word and just occasionally glanced at him to gauge the emotion on his face. He had now switched seats and was across from us. We were about another 6 miles from my drop-off when he leaned over to Tasha and told her to move back another seat, which she did without hesitation, and he jumped in the seat with me. He continued attacking me, so I put my face against the bus window and tried to scoot as far into the corner as I could. I guess my refusal to pay attention to him could be what escalated the situation, but next thing I know, he's got my head in a vice grip with his arms, and he's simultaneously strangling me and crushing my face. Keep in mind, I was an 8th grader. This guy was supposed to have graduated like a year or 2 prior, so legally, he was an adult. The school bus driver did nothing to stop P-Bob, to which he would later defend by saying that us kids on the back were always doing that kind of stuff and he didn't think anything out of the ordinary. I hesitate to even tell you that my bus driver was also the father of 2 of the holler kids, and the freaking sheriff of our town. So there I am, unable to breathe or scream, but still trying. I slapped, punched, clawed, but he kept squeezing my head. It felt as if my cheekbones were collapsing. I don't remember how long this went on, because things got blurry after this, even it was still fresh in my mind days later. I do remember he eventually let go of me and hit me a few times and tried to strangle me again. And I remember at some point seeing everyone, my friends, laughing at me. But like I said, it's blurry. The next thing I remember was standing by the front seats of the bus, waiting for it to come to a complete stop, and trying with everything in me to hold back tears. When I got off the bus, I ran straight into the house and to the bathroom to hide. I didn't want my mom to see me, and I needed a moment to gather myself. But the tears were pouring by then, and I couldn't make them stop. My face looked bad, but it only got worse over the next few days, as bruises tend to get darker as they heal. When I didn't come out of the bathroom for a while, my mom came to the door and asked what I was doing. Tasha, who was standing outside the door, I believe in an attempt to draw my mom's attention and force me to tell, started crying and spilled the beans. Yeah, I'm rolling my eyes on this one, still to this day. My mom forced me to come out of the bathroom. My screaming ninny stepdad got involved. The police were called, and I had to pose for what felt like an eternity of police evidence photos. My face looked like it had been put in a washing machine with a bunch of sneakers. My throat was bruised and scratched up a little. I was a mess. So there's actually a little more to this story, but I'm going to stop there because I've taken up enough of your time. P-Bob went to jail over this, but I actually had no idea that he did until I was in my early or mid-20s. I never rode the school bus again for the rest of my years at that school, and I rarely ever saw P-Bob in the years after high school, until he sent me a friend request on Facebook in 2017. Haha. Yeah. Kids, birds of a feather flock together. People like these are never your friend. Don't put yourself in a position I did, because things could have been much worse. I would say let's not meet P-Bob, but he died a year or so ago. I would say I feel sympathy for him or his family, but I don't.